Well, we were talking about the fire department.
Mm-hmm.
How many years did you volunteer for the fire department?
Um, well, I joined the fire company in 1954. My father was not a charter member because they could only have, I think it was 28 members when they initially formed the fire company, and he would have been the 29th. So he came into the fire company the second year it was into being, and they only had one fire truck, and it was an old fire truck that had been converted to a fire truck. But I think they could have 28 original members, but then they started auxiliary members and whatnot. But when I joined, you had to be voted in. You just didn't go in because they didn't want everybody, I guess, and whatnot. But it was an interesting year. It was when they first got the American LaFrance fire truck, which was the first really brand new fire truck that I can remember we had and whatnot. And they used to have another one called Larrabee fire truck, which was an older one. And I can remember working in my uncle's grocery store, which is Sutton's on Main Street. And if there was a fire and it was going past his store, he would run out of the shop. And sometimes he would throw his apron, because he always wore a butcher's apron because he was cheaper than the butcher, or just go hop on the back of the fire truck and go. And that was notorious. People did that, I mean, back then, because there were no, it was word of mouth. And then back in the fire company, they did set up a form where they had certain people, Eunice Lee and a couple others, that would call. They had a list of the active firemen, and they would give you a call. There's a fire at such and such, and whatnot. And then after that, they went into plectrons, and each of us had a plectron, and it was like the original, it would come on a signal and tell you that there was a fire such and such, and then you would go to that. And they still have a form of that, but it's much different. And of course, the fire whistle blew for anything. It was fire or a first aid squad originally, and then they got the fire signal, and the first aid squad hit the horn. They used to have a huge horn that blew for a first aid call, and the firehouse were there. And if they both blew, all hell had broken loose because you had something really bad and whatnot to do. But that's the way it was, how you knew whether you were supposed to go or do and whatnot. And we were all assigned trucks. You had, for 1 month, were assigned a truck to make sure that it was clean and all the equipment was in place and whatnot. But we used to have once a month you had a fire drill, and they got to be kind of funny because when you do some funny things, there was one time I remember we had a fire drill, and they used to take the hoses and squirt each other. And this one day, somebody grabbed the hose from a roll of hose and picked it up and started chasing a fellow by the name of Frank Leck, who was a young, just been induced into the fire company, and said, "They're coming after you, Frank." Well, of course, a lot of people had already been drenched. And he went running down Main Street with somebody chasing him with an empty hose. And we've always laughed, he thought he was going to get drowned into the inception to that thing. And then another funny incident that I remember, when they had this fire truck, this Ward LaFrance, it could go crazy, but the speedometer was wrong. It was calibrated wrong. And Mike Morelli had just joined the fire company, and they said, "Well, take it for a run and get used to driving it." And Rebel was on the radio. It's when we first had radios in the fire trucks, and he said, "How fast do you go?" And they said, "Well, I'm going 60. "Oh, come on, speed it up." Well, what they didn't tell him, the speedometer was 10 miles off. So he was actually doing 70 miles an hour. And we're talking now back in the 50s, and the highway was where you could do things like that, but it didn't. And then another funny with that, you used to get, with the radios being near, in the fire company, um, the weather would affect the bands, and you'd get wrong bands in there. And the one day, somebody called in and was, what station was this? And Rebel, being a Southerner, said, "Well, you just call Waco, Texas," with his Southern accent. And they said, "Where?" And actually it was Mendham calling Chester. But he pulled it, and he could pull it off because he was from down south and he had a brogue a mile long and whatnot. They fit right in. But you had all kinds of things. And then that, like I told you once before about the night we slept in a firehouse when the Pullman mansion caught fire and whatnot, to be sure that it would be okay. But different things of it there. Interesting, that's for sure.
And when did you stop volunteering?
What's that?
When did you stop volunteering?
Oh, probably, I did it for probably maybe 25 years, and then I slowed down and whatnot. And then I'm a member, but I'm what they call a life member now. So I think it's, well, coming up 50 years, but, or 60 years, what am I talking about? 1954. Yeah, long time.
Yeah.
But it was interesting all the way through. And I think I told you about the time that we were fighting the bonfire, the barn fire, and we were working on different hoses and whatnot, and one bunch of guys were squirting water, and one of the other neighbors, they had come up with a chemical to help retard a barn fire so that it would kill the fire. And somebody from one of the other companies had this material, and they said, "Stop squirting the fire. We're using wet water." And as only Art Lee could have done, he said, "And what the hell kind of water do you think we're using? Dry?" But we found out later that actually it was a chemical that the other company was using to put it out. But little innuendo things like that used to happen, and whatnot, and go on with the fire company. But good memories.